Welcome to this real talk where we're going to talk about immersive learning, immersive training, realism, virtual reality, but hopefully, and I think we're going to do that also about applications and real life applications and the impact it can create. And I'm really stoked to do this together with Dan from CreatorUp. Dan, good morning to you, I believe.
Good morning here. Yes, good day, everybody. Thanks for having us, and this is going to be an exciting chat.
For sure. Because we, of course, have a very exciting guest in our midst. Julia Scott, welcome also to you. Big welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, I'm happy to be here and share about what we're doing over at Santa Clara University.
Very good, because that's, of course, where you are, well, let's say, based and part of the Brain and Memory Care Lab, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe to kick it off, what do you do there? What are you working on?
So the Brain and Memory Care Lab is a segment of the Healthcare Innovation and Design program, kind of a larger entity at the university based in the School of Engineering. And so within that lab, we are focusing on how we can use immersive technologies and neurotechnologies to build interventions for things related to brain health. So that can range from behavioral interventions for ADHD to memory care training, as we're going to be talking about today.
Very good. So thank you. So and your background actually is, well, to me, it's incredibly impressive. Because you publish widely on normal and abnormal neurodevelopment, as well as brain aging, I've read. And your aim is to enhance the neurofeedback experience with the affordance of VR, as I've read on your profile, for such as that therapeutic use may be done also in-home in an engaging manner. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that aim? So what are you after?
So when we're trying to use or integrating neurotechnology and immersive technologies, it's really the question of how do we use these in a home setting rather than a lab setting? These have been used in lab settings in kind of controlled environments in a way for quite a long time, but the design of the technologies, the form factors, and the connectivity of devices is now enabling us to transport this to anywhere and everywhere, and the affordability is also improving. So now we can take things that used to be very inaccessible and expensive in the clinic and turn them into tools you can use at home in order to improve cognition, to work on particular behavioral habits that you may want to change or improve, like for example with the ADHD, and that's the primary application for that specific neurofeedback research, where we're taking brain signals, turning them into control mechanisms for the game that's occurring in VR. And so you can work on skills in a realistic environment, a 360 environment, while training the brain. So it's kind of a compounding effect for the gains that you can have from these interventions.
Interesting. And does that also mean, because you were talking about kind of in kind of a lab environment versus in home, does that also mean that you then have a broader audience, so to speak? So then a broader, maybe different audience?
Yeah, for sure. It's going beyond who can get access to the clinics or the universities. And this can be deployed out to rural areas. We can put this in schools, to care facilities. VR is being used quite a bit in care homes to provide therapy and entertainment for people with cognitive impairment. So it really is expanding who can benefit from these technologies.
Julia, maybe to start with you, asking you this question. When was the first time you engaged or came across virtual reality and where you said, hey, this is interesting. This is what I want to bring into my work context?
So that began because at Santa Clara University, they had just opened what we call the Imaginarium. And the Imaginarium is a complete XR design studio. And as they opened up, they wanted to encourage faculty projects. And so from that, I was able to be introduced to what was possible with these new tools. And the director of that program had this, in effect, a speed dating approach to this, of matching faculty to students. So students who have gone through the basic training, knowing full well the faculty do not know what they're doing, but can see how VR can apply to their research. And through this, I started the first project, where I pitched the idea to the students about how we can combine brain signals with the immersive qualities, and the not just the immersiveness, but the fact that you can measure pretty much everything someone is doing, and while they're in the experience, and how we can use that to skill train, to build self-awareness, and so on. And so from that, I was able to match with a handful of students and continue building up the program. But there were
and when was this?
This was 2018.
18 already. Okay, so it's a while back. Very good. Yeah. But was that also your starting point then in 2018? Where was it your first experience as well, or was it longer ago?
Yeah, boy, that's asking me to date myself. But I would go back to things that go back to the video game era, back in restaurants, where I actually had a venue that I managed that had one of these gigantic headsets, and it was called Dactyl Nightmare. And this was late 90s. Wow. And this thing was literally, super big, based on some NASA technology. But that was, I saw the change moment happening then. And I think everybody saw things happen like then the roller coaster experience. And I think the growth of Oculus, and, over the last few years when Facebook changed to Meta and acquired Oculus and really started to get behind headset, and it moved more of this into mainstream. So I would say it's been a journey from all the way back into the 90s, and just different aha moments along the way.
Awesome, very good. Julia, so of course, so you've experienced in 2018 different applications. You started to kind of experiment with it, if I can say so. So, and maybe zooming in or getting to the dementia care project, where you, of course, using 360 video. So how did you land on using that as a medium, as opposed to maybe 3D, right? So where does the choice for 360 video lie?
So once we, as a group, we decided to do the dementia care training in an immersive way. As we went through the design process, we then spent a few weeks kind of doing the analysis of what would be the right form of VR for this. And there are advantages to doing something completely within a virtual environment with, animated characters. There are advantages to doing things kind of with a live recording. And so we kind of made our decision matrix of what are the functional criteria that are really important for achieving the effects we want. Because what we really wanted was for people to use the training in order to have a greater sense of immersion in that realistic space. So something that is very much like a home setting, and that we can effectively communicate the nonverbal cues that are important for caring for someone with dementia. A simplistic, lip flap or eyebrow raise with kind of common animations wasn't going to transfer easily to the subtleties of our body language in person. And so so that was one, kind of reaching our outcomes would be more effective. The learning outcomes would be more effective with video, with a 360
Yeah.
video. The second aspect of it was development time. So the amount of time it would go from idea to design to testable prototype for us would have been very long to try to produce a semi-realistic virtual environment and characters and all of that, compared to doing it in a filming setting. So those were the two most important things leading to our decision to go with 360 video, and ultimately working with CreatorUp to make that happen.
Very good. Well then, CreatorUp, you came across Julia. So what can you describe a little bit the process you guys went through?
Well, I think it's important to note like where Julia and I bumped into each other, which was at an industry event. I want to say it was AWE XR. And it was that's a great sign that you've got, somebody from a university or a department or a division who's exploring all options. Go to the conferences, learn about new stuff, watch, observe. Ultimately, I just remember you asked great questions. How do we do it? It wasn't like you were in buying mode. You were just exploring how things are done and what's our approach to that. And we are content creators. I mean, we produce video content, animation content, VR content for whatever screens, whether it's an iPhone, tablet, VR headset, of course, or a multimedia experience that kind of touches all screens. And we had a general quick conversation about the project. And I gave one of the advantages of filming this in video and some mixed media because of the power of compassion, of persuasion, of empathy that happens, and in filming it in all of the right styles and qualities, and also coming back to something that is a manageable budget, because a lot of people go to explore their first VR experience and looking at creating a Unreal Engine type environment or a video game type environment, and they stumble across a $250,000 bid for their first beta project. And for a lot of people, that is what keeps VR over there on the shelf, and inhibits them from starting with something that they can get data and feedback and a first trial done, and then learn what to do next. So yeah, our first conversation was about content, filmmaking efficiencies, how we work, where our people are, and things started to progress from there.
Yeah. I'd add to that, like on the timeline, Dan and I had that first meet it was, I guess, the beginning of June last year. And at that point, we had shortlisted 4 different projects that could occur on the dementia care perspective. And we had to go pitch those to the funding foundation, to their panel. And so we didn't decide which of the 4 that were going to go to prototype. It had to be pitched to them. They evaluated them. We had to revise, and then they made their selection, saying this is the most impactful, the most innovative, and the most feasible, kind of at those 3 criteria. And I think if we had not had those early conversations with Dan about feasibility, and we couldn't say it would be about this much time, that pitch probably would not have been as strong. The importance of the academic and industry relationships are kind of key to the type of work we do, and kind of a principle of our program, of the Healthcare Innovation Design Program, is to have that 1 foot out of the ivory tower at all times. So.
Very good. That's a great principle. And maybe on that pitching, I'm just curious. So did because that's also discussions I've had with other people, let's say, who are trying it out or exploring, and that whole kind of getting buy-in from stakeholders. So did you use how was the pitch? Was it with VR headset? Was it without? Was it just paper proposal? So how was your approach? And maybe
Mhm.
we can also take some lessons from there in order to make as such proposals successful.
In our case, it was really a traditional needs statement pitch,
Okay.
where really well defining where the gap is in the field, what's the strategy to actually fill that gap, and some context of what tools can actually implement that strategy without giving the entire plan at that point. So it was making a compelling argument that the unmet need of caregiver training could be met um, by, in a sense, like simulation training, right? But we're saying this times for simulation training to be scalable, it needs to be on VR devices and mobile devices. Anything kind of less than that, kind of the in-person or role playing and so on, cannot scale to meet the needs of the 50 million people with dementia. So, I
Yeah.
mean, this won't get to 50 million people either, but it will get a closer, maybe 10, 20%, which would be great.
Yeah. Awesome. And thank you for sharing, Julia. So, on let's say the workflow. Okay, so you guys met, you did your pitch. It landed on this part of let's say the project, so to speak. Then what? So how what were the steps? And maybe also Dan, from your perspective, and of course of Julia, kind of how did it actually come to life?
Yeah, I can weigh in on some of this if you want, Julia. As I would say that we typically in VR have things broken down into everything that is one, confirming just the general scope of work, the project in general, like what's the goal, and address the why are we doing this, and is it a
Hmm?
good fit, and help, whether it's everybody always has to get this approved by somebody, whether it's a CFO or a board or a meeting with your team. VR costs money, typically more than video, right? Than traditional video, because of the additional time in production, and editing, and then even publishing and making it last. And then one other consideration is the headset, right? Final publishing and the deployment of whether this is done in headset, tablet, iPhone, desktop, because the difference between if we go around and look at the airport, see how many people have a smartphone versus who's toting around a headset, drastically different. And everybody knows that. And of course, the experience is drastically different and better in headset. And we can talk about that. But what we did is we broke it down into one, confirming the scope of the project, two, addressing production, and how that's done, and everything leading up to the day or days that you're going to film something, and then the timeline around all of the editing and approving, and then really the authoring. So there's a big difference when you're doing a choose your own adventure VR experience, that
Yeah.
is taking these little clips, and this is your expertise, where we had a conversation around what is the best place to do this. I mean, technically somebody can go shoot on an Insta360 right now and do it and upload it and get it into YouTube, but it's easier said than done. There's a lot of editing that you need to do in alternative
Yeah.
softwares to get it published into YouTube, and then to eventually get somebody to watch that in a headset. But currently, that platform doesn't allow you to experience a journey with multiple different options. So one of the last steps that we typically address in any project is, let's talk about your audience. What does that experience look like? How do you want them to do that? Where will they do it? How often will they do it? How many users, students, customers, etc.? And what's the best platform for that final published piece? Because for VR to work, all of those buckets need to be in sync. So,
Yeah.
if you do great production, but people can't find it, whether they're customers, students, etc., or if the editing is not good, it's like, if you spend too much over here and you don't finish it up and make it perfect, then it's not a good investment. If you spend a ton on your final editing and publishing and software, but the lighting was not good, or somebody didn't bring the right microphone on the front end. R of VR is reality. And what happens is it takes your viewer out of context. It's kind of like they're mentally taking their headset off and they're reminded this isn't real. When the sound is off, when the video is glitchy, when they see a stitch line that's way off, suddenly they're not thinking about dementia home care training. They're thinking about, I wonder how these guys made this. So all of those things you want to address all the way through the production. Santa Clara University project, we had a moment where it's called the sundowning stage, and Dr. Scott can talk about that. But we filming it in the evening, right? So we had a facility where that we staged this entire production at, and it was at a home, and but we're filming during the day, and we blacked out the windows to make it look like evening. Well, what happens when you black out your windows? You turn all those windows into instant mirrors. And then when you're running a camera on top of a rover, you just created a whole bunch of additional editing project, because suddenly there's your camera in the reflection. So things that a production team has to think about and take into consideration, and not charge a client extra for. So either you knew that was coming, which we did, and you knew you're going to have to edit it out, but you say this is going to make for a great shot. So you if you don't have lots of good planning conversations leading into it, and have aha moments at both as the client and the producer, you can set yourself up for trouble. And I think not everybody can go meet somebody and get to know somebody ahead of time at a conference, but I think the relationship building and the understanding each other's challenges helped build this into a successful project. And we both learned a lot along the way. So hopefully that answers kind of what happened next in production, and maybe Julie can add more or ask more if you want.
Yeah, and we definitely learned a lot from each other in the process, where we're coming to it from the perspective of kind of knowing the dementia care field like really well. The team of faculty that we had with us, and our outside consultants with the Family Caregiver Alliance and so on, were helping us form a script, a story that really was true to form, really did represent best practices and common mistakes that occur, and checking the kind of validity of our storyline and what we're going to produce. So that's where our first efforts was developing that script. And that was a good amount of back and forth with CJ, with the director, and with the instructional designer from CreatorUp, to do other levels of checks. And then those questions of, what would it take to film this, right? And when we're going through this the first time, like, we don't know that, right? We're just creating these stories. It's just on paper and in our minds. But it was working with them to say, okay, how many rooms are you going to need? Are people walking around? How many actors do you need? Those sorts of things helped help the process along, and for the most part, kind of stay on time, right, as much as possible. So that was really good to have that external partnership to keep us on track. That, okay, we have a filming date, like, it's not going to move. We've got to make it by then. So that's important.
Yeah. And how was it? Because it's kind of choose your own adventure, interactive, experiencing consequences, and of course then also filming those consequences. But as a user, that's kind of the story you are in first person. As a creator, as the content designer, you have to think of that story. Was that scenario-based thinking? Was that new for you guys, or was it something you've already done? Or how was that process to get that interactive story into play?
It was fairly new for me. Based on our previous conversations, you can tell I'm a little bit more of a computational person, and and I have thought a bit about user experience, like in the design of the neurofeedback work,
Yeah.
but I even needed a template on how to build a script. It's something that was not in my wheelhouse, but we do have the whole university there. So we did go to the communications department and bring in a film student. We went to the theater department, and the chair of the theater department is actually a voice coach, and had just the last sabbatical had done training on intonation and empathy with voice. So she was the narrator for our training module. So it's really important that we had the breadth of talent within the university to create that team and get the end product. Because I really am much more quantitative than qualitative.
That's a great
But
point.
was it also a fun Sorry, then go.
It was fun. Yeah, it was absolutely fun. Yeah.
I mean, they really did a great job of bringing together the team. I mean, and to realize, for anybody, that's a great takeaway lesson. Like, what advantages can you bring to the table, but also, listen to good instructional designers like Kristen on our team and CJ on our team, who's a producer because you also want, the one thing that can happen in any kind of production is sometimes your producer client will say, yes, no problem. Yes, that sounds good. Yes, another actor, great idea. And cha-ching, 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 your project scope is continuing to creep. And good questions like, oh, we'll have them move from this room to this other scene. And, the great thing about video or even VR, everyone's excited. Everyone, wants to weigh in and contribute. But, frankly, not a lot of people have done it. So when they say, yeah, and then they'll have these guys move into the next room and do another scene from there. And what happens if you're shooting in 360 VR is so much different than what's in frame right now on our Zoom calls, right? We're managing, about 20 degrees of space right here versus 360. I mean, that's where the primary focus is. If we shot this whole room, it would be like, what's going on over here? Why is this window? What's happening here? And when you do that in 360 VR, that's where you want a good producer to say, I mean, should we do that, or should we handle all of this from this one scene? Because if you're willing to do another scene, that means we've got a whole bunch of stuff we need to think about to move this into an outside setting. Because typically your user is still going to focus on that general area, but there's a lot of projects where Guido, you do a lot of safety projects where you ask somebody to look around the room, have a look around the warehouse. Did you notice these things? So tremendous amount of staging that needs to happen there, compared to a 2D project where you just push everything back over here and don't worry about it. Nothing's happening behind the camera. And I think, what SCU did as a team and working with CreatorUp, like we just had a lot of moments where you do your wish list and then you narrow it down to, okay, but what's feasible with the team that we've got, with the volunteers we've got, with the people that are willing to write a script or do voiceover. And we have some clients who say, oh, great, we'll do voiceover. And it's like, are you sure you want to do that? Sometimes it works great. And with SCU, fantastic, as good or better than hiring a voiceover actor for that opening piece. Probably better, because I can't imagine how many cuts she did to get that perfect. But these are things that you want to, clients should challenge the producers. Producers should also fairly challenge the clients and say, either we don't have enough budget to do this, and here's another idea. And there's new ideas being developed and invented every day in VR. And that's the fun thing, is as soon as one producer says, actually, you can't do that, somebody shows up with a new camera and a new editing technique. And, a long time ago, it took a long time to make selfie stick polls disappear. And now it's instant on a number of different devices.
Unbelievable. Yeah, that's very true. So Maybe Julia, what can you share about the student feedback or the user feedback? Maybe the trials you're doing, and maybe also looking forward in saying, okay, so what is ahead of you? But let's start with the feedback you've gotten so far.
Yeah, so we've tested this formally with about 24 test users. So these include professional caregivers, family caregivers, people who work in management for care programs, and kind of systematically ask those questions about authenticity, the realism, the user experience, and did your classic user testing with your game questionnaires and all of that. And so what we've learned from that is that the ease of use for the interface was really good. So once someone who was even new to VR figured out the controller, that you really just have to point and click, it's just you're clicking in a different way, it was smooth sailing from there. Once they got oriented, so within a matter of 2 minutes, people were kind of oriented to the interface, and then they could really settle in and have that sense of presence in the experience, and didn't notice the time go by. And the total length of it ranged from like 11 to 16 minutes to get through the experience, depending on what choices you make. Because if you make really poor choices, you got to go back and try again. But the feedback we got was very encouraging. Like when we asked those questions about the realism, and there were, some people who were surprised that we had actors for the person with dementia. It was really, really believable, the presentation of the characteristics. The praise for the actors was strong, and that sense of really being present and making the choices and experiencing the consequences was highly rated. And importantly, like back to Dan's comment about editing, what's really important for this to work is for it to flow across all of the different branches, that it made sense to go from point A and then to point X, Y, or Z. And we did effectively do that, where people never commented, regardless of what branch they took, that the flow with the story was choppy or it didn't make any sense. That we were able to achieve through that cooperation. And most people were saying like something to the effect of, I wish I had this sooner. I had to learn these lessons, just from experience. The managers kind of, for the most part, they're the ones who are telling us like, we need something like this for our employees. Like, can we have this today? On the flip side, we did have, of course, we had criticisms and areas we can improve, but for the most part, those were feasible. Like it was things like for the voiceover, adding written bullet points on the screen to kind of reinforce, because all of our auditory processing and memory is not the sharpest. So having that visual reinforcement would be helpful. Some scenes were a little bit overacted. And so we're learning, tone it down. But the core aspect of it, we found was really solid. And now we're in progress on a study to kind of evaluate the differences between the same content on those static 2D videos, so the non-interactive, in the mobile application with Warp VR, and then also on the VR headset. So the mobile app and the VR are interactive, but different levels of immersion. And so we'll be able to compare what the effects are on knowledge gains, on self-confidence, and satisfaction with the experience. And so we'll have those results in July. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think you had some initial feedback, and I was actually surprised, because what I see a lot when you go to put a new headset on somebody, especially if they, last time they did VR was whatever in the 90s, or the roller coaster ride 10 years ago, and suddenly you've got a headset. And I thought your student feedback in general, in terms of onboarding and ease into it, was refreshingly, positive in terms of your stats. But that was great when you shared that. I don't know if you can kind of highlight some of the feedback in terms of the user experience.
Yeah. The usability score, the SUS, was, I think it was 85%, which is on like the very high end. And that was in large part because everything was kind of ported through the Warp VR app, so that we could go directly to that application, click on the module of our choice, and then it automatically goes in. And so those aspects of the user experience are what made the onboarding very easy. Other little things on the environmental side is, making sure the person is in a swivel chair. So they can just turn around easily without having to stand or move around. Or if they're on a four-legged chair, kind of scooching and craning, little things like that. And then teaching the positioning of the hand, very quickly. And I've gotten very used to all of it, Dan, as well, like how to tell someone to put your hand in exactly this position when you have an Oculus touch controller. And then like, just don't move it from there. Like, you're in exactly the position. So those were the things that made it very easy to get anyone on. Honestly, if we had any issues with getting things set up, it was with the kind of the Oculus onboarding. Like if you had to log in on something, set up the Wi-Fi, those are the things that took time, and we had some challenges with, especially when we're going to different sites and making sure the phone, the laptop, the headset is all on the same Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi is fast enough. And those, on the usability side, the setup, those were kind of the challenges we had, not with the actual application. Yeah.
Cool. Happy to hear that, of course. And well, you said it about yourself. You're more a data person in a way. So how do you guys look at the data? Because of course that's also part of the Warp Studio, the part that you can actually see what students did or have done. Are you using that? Is that and how do you perceive the value of, let's call it that, performance data?
So far, the most useful metric for us out of this was just the time, having that clock on there. So I can tell you it was 11 to 16 minutes, not 10 to 15. It's not a feeling of how long it took. I have that actual metric. The other thing that was helpful for the user testing was, since we know each of the responses from there, we know which branches were most commonly selected. We can get some sense of that from the aggregate, from the score, right? So if we have poorer scores, then that means they've had more loops, and then it takes longer. But we could actually create each of the users' branches that they selected, and when we're assessing whether the options we presented were realistic, right? So if there's an option that no one ever picks, then it's so ridiculously wrong, right? Or we phrase things incorrectly. So it was able to give us that feedback on our design process objectively, without having to, in a sense, kind of interrogate the user afterwards and ask them, what did you do? What choices did you make? And like try to get that afterwards, which was kind of the older model of doing things. If that data isn't recorded. And recorded in a nice, neat way for us to easily access.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how we've been using the data so far. And
Ah,
we'll be looking at it again, like when when we finish the effectiveness study, the learning effectiveness study, that's going to be another one of the metrics, because if someone goes through this once or twice or 3 times, the path they take in a sense should get shorter, right? If you make all the right choices, you would basically go through like 9 scenes, I think, the way we've
mhm.
designed it. And so just that kind of path length is another way we can assess how quickly someone is learning the skill. Yeah.
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 Is it maybe 2 questions also out of my own curiosity? So, is there, what do you say to the students when they put on the headset? Do they have an assignment?
Mhm.
And the reason I'm asking is because you refer to them making different choices, and as you do it again, you make less choices, or well, better choices potentially. Let's say from gaming theory, we know that there are different what they call player types, right? So
Mhm.
you have the killers, the explorers, the socializers, and the achievers, I believe.
Mhm.
But I always use that as a method or as a framework where you say, okay, so as some people like to explore, and some
Mhm.
people just like to get 5 stars,
Mhm.
to kind of really make it flat. So how do you look at that? So first question is, do you give them an assignment, whereas get to the 5 stars as soon as possible? And how does that relate to, well, let's say the different player types in a way?
Um, when we're doing the formal testing, the direction is to give them the direction that's given to them, that's in the voiceover at the intro, is to guide the person with dementia through the sundowning period with the greatest amount of ease. So with minimizing agitation, increasing enjoyment,
Hmm.
and so it's kind of a goal-based direction in that
Yeah,
way. So
yeah.
it's not telling them that, we don't even tell them like that there are points involved. Then they see at the end, oh, I got 4 stars, yay! It's kind of like this
Exactly. Yeah.
unexpected reward. But the setup is trying to put them in as much as possible, put them in the shoes of the caregiver in the simulation, and when they're in the shoes of the caregiver, then kind of the next step is thinking about how to make the experience as good as possible for the person with dementia, rather than how do I win this for myself. So it's a little bit different. It's kind of like the difference between the kids' board games that are like cooperative games versus Monopoly.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so we
yeah.
haven't really thought about it in the sense of player types yet, but that's a good thing for us to think about. And when we're doing it informally, when we just want that user feedback of, just test out the product sort of thing,
Yeah,
then I will
yeah.
tell people, like, just choose whatever you want. Like, there's bad answers, but just choose whatever you want and explore. So that's the type of approach I took when we ran this at IVRHA, so the International VR Healthcare Association meeting, and we had a demo table. And so
Hmm.
the audience there are, um, it's clinicians of a variety of types, it's VR, XR developers, and it's not specifically dementia care, right? So
No.
it was more about kind of highlighting what this type of VR application can do. So for them, I said, do whatever you want and don't have to show them how to use a controller. So it's a very different audience. And so their lengths were longer, and the ones that really did explore, a couple of them came out and they're like, why is this taking so long? So at some
Yeah,
point you do have to make the right choice.
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's true. Very good. Guys, considering time, because I'm really enjoying this conversation, but we're also hitting the hour almost. Maybe is there something we missed, Julia, and then on talking about this experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good enough experience that we want to do it again. So
Okay.
we are working on the next module and working out the script for that with the aim of filming this summer again with CreatorUp. So, yeah.
Awesome. That's great to hear. That's
yeah. We're excited to be partners and look forward to that, of course. And we're thrilled. And I think in the spirit of our sponsor of this program, and this is not just a plug, but there was a moment where we demonstrated Warp to Julia, and we taught their team how to use it, and our team had to consider if this was the best available option. And I will admit it was anytime you do that as you're bringing in a partner, introducing this new technology to a valuable client that you've got, there's a degree of trust that needs to happen, and confidence in the product. And it's been exciting for me. It was really great to see how quickly your team started understanding the editing and how to kind of take ownership and build their own project. And it works. And I think it's there's so much that you can do on the creative side with Warp. So seriously, thanks for what you guys are doing. Honestly, you guys have been there all the way through the process. Guido was asking questions as though he doesn't know, but he knew all along what we were doing and how it's going. And hopefully this is helpful to anybody considering a project. And I hope I speak for everybody. Reach out to us, ask us more questions. I think we're all ambassadors in this space, and would love to see more. And hopefully somebody is listening and says, let's do it. And we can watch your video at some point soon.
Exactly. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Julia, for taking the time again. True pleasure. And looking forward to the results, and of course the follow-up scenarios. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much. Bye.